at arsenic now. There is a new standard coming into effect. The old standard was 0.025 milligrams per liter. That's a small fraction. That's a hard number to wrap your mind around. I like to use slightly different units called micrograms per liter or parts per billion, because in micrograms per liter, the standard is 25. It's a lot easier for most people to wrap their mind around 25 than 0.025. So 25 parts per billion is the old standard. The water, the well water arsenic levels have been very steady over the years between 17 and 23. So just under the standard. A new standard is coming into effect. The new standard is 10. So the levels in the well which were under the old standard are going to be over the new one. And that new standard is in line with recommendations from the Government of Canada through the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment, as well as the United States and the World Health Organization. Comes into effect January 1st, 2018. And just to kind of wrap your mind around how much arsenic the number that we're seeing here is, it's about the equivalent of a shot glass of pure substance in an Olympic swimming pool. It's a very, very small amount when we're talking about a level of around 20 parts per billion. So what you're here to talk about tonight, what I've been talking about are the technical things, because I'm a scientist. But I am very conscious that a lot of people feel an attachment to this well field, are in the habit of drinking the water, like drinking the water. So I think there's a few things that I'd recommend be talked about a bit more. One of them is, I'm a scientist, and it's always good to have data so you know what you're talking about. I think it would be useful to survey users about how the water from the well is being used. You know, what I heard early on from Chris, I think, was that in the summertime when the well runs dry, that's where they come for the water, and I expect that's true for probably a good number of the people that access that well. There may be some who are using it year-round, there may be some who are using it for other purposes, and it would be good to know, because that can inform any decisions that the Conservation Authority makes. Another thought I had is, if you remember from earlier on in my presentation, my recollection is that there were other wells in the well field. I don't know if they're still accessible and usable in any form, or if they were decommissioned, but if they are accessible, it would be worth testing each and every one of them. I do know from my groundwater science that even when you've got several wells in a well field side by side, the levels of different chemicals in those wells can differ quite considerably. You know, if the one is just 5 meters lower than the other, or tapping into a little vein or something, it's astounding how big a difference there can be for wells that are adjacent to one another, so that's worth doing. Also, treatment options are worth looking at. You know, our modern society is filled with a lot of very clever people. Water treatment is something that's a very mature science. There are treatment options out there. They do cost money. And I can understand from the Conservation Authority's perspective, they really aren't in the business of supplying drinking water. And I can understand their discomfort in finding themselves in a situation where there's an expectation that they're going to be providing water that now is looking like it needs treatment. But it would be worth finding out what the treatment options are, what those treatment options cost. And one of the things, although some of you might have an allergic reaction here, one of the things worth considering, one of the ways that people in other parts of the world deal with water supplies that have got too high levels of arsenic is they blend them with other water that's got very low levels to bring the overall concentrations down. This is also something that can be considered. Finally, for the Conservation Authority, the one thing I'd suggest is, you know, the property was given to you in the past by the town of Ancaster. There was no cost attached. And if you're finding yourself in a situation of having what feels like an albatross around your neck, you could certainly consider passing it on to a public or a private third party that might continue doing the work with the artesian well here. So that's the presentation I've got. I will stick around if people have got questions or if things come up in the discussion where I can help with the science.
Will, could you take a few just technical questions at this point? I don't want to jump into sort of the broader issue of how we use the well, but if there's any technical questions, Will might be able to answer now.
Sure. Yes.
Technical question. Is there historical data to show that the arsenic levels have remained constant?
Yes. My understanding is that they've been pretty much where they are for a long, long time.
So that rules out pesticide spray and so on being a source of.
Yeah, and if you look at the upgradient land use, there's really not that sort of very intensive farming activity in there. There's a lot of woodland in the source area for this well field.
Second question, do you know how deep the well is?
I don't. The Conservation Authority, who's going to be speaking after me, may well know.
Okay.
But I believe it's over 100 meters. I mean, these are deep wells.
400 feet.
Yep.
For tap water, what would be the arsenic level?
City tap water?
Yeah.
Well, it certainly has to meet both the old and, in the future, the new standard. Given that it's coming from Lake Ontario, I would expect that it's quite low. I don't have that information. It's a great question. That's something worth looking
How
at.
can we find out?
Oh,
I live
there's-
in Burlington.
Yeah.
I'm also curious about other municipalities too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
any big
Can
city,
we find out like a clear place where we can find?
yeah, any big municipality like Hamilton or Burlington, they've got a water treatment plant. That water treatment plant has to file annual reports. They've got water quality results in those. You should be easily able to find those online. And if not, you just call the city and say, where can I get these numbers? They've actually got an obligation to make those available. Yeah,
Well, the truth is, probably, I can speak for probably most of us, that we drink the water because it's untreated. And probably one of the reasons why the cancer in the areas that you mentioned, or at least in the area around the well is lowest, is because they've been drinking untreated water. That would be probably one of the reasons, as well as the minerals that are good for us in the water. So that's why we drink the water. So what I'm suggesting is, and you brought it up, if the city of Hamilton doesn't want to take care of it, I mean, we'd be more than glad, I'm sure, someone to take up the cause to purchase this well, this heritage that's a treasure.
yeah, we're getting into the
Getting into the meat of it.
the meat of it, and that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to speak to the science.
I just want to, technical question?
Yes. I may have missed it, you may have covered it already. I'm just wondering, why did, I guess, the province and the country adopt this lower level? I mean, they've stuck with this previous one for, you know, I looked this up, I found that the EPA in the States had adopted the 10 milligrams per liter, or sorry, the 0.01. And, you know, that was in 2000. So, I mean, 17 years have passed here with no concern. You know, if the government was so concerned about our safety, why didn't they take this up sooner? Like, what's the impetus that led to this?
These are, unfortunately, and I say this based on experience, the adoption of drinking water standards, which should be very much guided by the science, is often guided by politics. And yeah, but Canada often drags its feet on bringing in new standards compared to the US and the World Health Organization to give a break to an industry, to give a break to a municipality that might otherwise face higher costs. I've seen it again and again, but they're on the move right now, and I don't think it's a bad idea for that drinking water standard to come down. I've looked at the information about arsenic, and arsenic is not a chemical to be trifled with.
Right, but there's inorganic and, or manufactured arsenic and organic arsenic, right? It's a naturally occurring thing that we're always suggesting. I mean, we're taking that in through the air we breathe, right? I mean, nobody's shutting down the amount of air traffic in the air that's dumping out, I'm not gonna say chemtrails, but just pollutants. You know, just pollutants. Imagine exhaust dropping down on these things all the time, which is what's happening. That gets in the soil.
Yeah, you know.
So why one and not another?
Why one and not another? Again, those are questions that get out of the science and into the politics. Water is seen as a prime health-related risk factor for all of us, though, because we require water to live. Air, likewise, we have to breathe air. And so these are pretty strictly regulated by provincial and national authorities. I find they tend to actually do a better job on the water side than the air side, but that's me straying out of my scientific field now and getting into the politics of it. But the bottom line is, I'm glad that standard is coming down to 10. I think that's important. I think the job for all of us, if we want to continue using water from this location, is to find a way to get the arsenic levels in that water supply that's being provided to the public down.
There was no concern before, how come it's a concern now?
Because that drinking water standard has changed. It is an interesting question as to what the conservation authority's obligations are in light of the new standard. For any larger drinking water supply system like those operated by the city of Hamilton, there's an absolute requirement that you have to be under the standard. For the very smallest systems, there are circumstances in which you can post signage indicating that the levels of some substance in the well are above the limit, and that's done currently for sodium. It could be that that's possible. In this case, that research, to my knowledge, hasn't been done yet to find out exactly what the classification is of this drinking water system and what the actual requirements for it are. But maybe we'll hear that from the Conservation Authority folks.
You said the well field has an area of origin. Where is that? I have no notion of whether it's several hundred feet from the well or several miles from the well. How does that work?
The question was, where does the water that's coming into that well originate from? Way back in the day when they drilled those wells, they should have done studies to try and find that. You do pumping tests, you get observation wells out in the landscape, and you start seeing which ones respond and so on. I'm not privy to that information. My sense, just looking at it as a geoscientist, is that the source waters are coming from up the valley, towards here, towards Copetown, not from further down the valley. The clear direction of groundwater movement in this area is down the Dundas Valley towards the city.
Can we sign waivers and drink from the well?
Not a question I can answer.
Maybe we should move on to I know there's some questions, people are gonna get a chance to speak. We're just in the technical phase right now. Is that a technical question?
Well, a few years ago, I talked to the conservation people, I met down the well, and they informed me at that time that the water actually came from Georgian Bay.
Yeah.
Started to get here underground. That's right. Okay, now, that's just hearsay, I got that. The question I have is, how much of this arsenic polluted water, 1/2
the standards are based on
That's
the.
the standards.
Hold on.
How
No.
much water would I have to drink out of that well before I start feeling heavy?
Yeah. Nobody knows is the short answer, but the standards are set on the assumption that the water supply is your sole source water supply. It's for lifetime exposure. So the assumption is that if you're drinking water from this well for 70 years, you're exposed to a certain risk. Normally in Canada, the acceptable level of risk for a substance in drinking water is one additional cancer in a population of 100,000 people. With arsenic, it's actually, the numbers are actually higher. They've set the standard not at the level that they'd have to for health reasons, but for reasons of treatability. The current state of the science is municipalities that are providing drinking water can't treat down to that 1 in 100,000 level. But it would be some number of additional cancers in 100,000. You know, it's lottery type odds. And there's a lot you can do to decrease risk factors, like I said. There's also a lot that people do to increase the risk factors, and you know, that's one of our jobs as thinking human beings is to be smart about what we're doing in our lives and make sure that we're as healthy as we can be. I think I'm gonna stop at this point because we've got other people who wanna speak. I don't wanna be up here the whole time. If there's space at the end of the meeting, you can have me back up, but I'm gonna pass things on.
Thanks.